Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Resource Efficiency for Businesses online training series offered by GIZ, the German Corporation for International Cooperation, and the VDI Competence Centre for Resource Efficiency, also known as VDI. I'm Stephanie Midorini from the GGKP, the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, a global network of organizations and experts working to equip the policy, business, and finance communities with the knowledge, guidance, data, and tools they need to green their operations. Learn more on our three knowledge platforms: greenindustryplatform.org, greenfinanceplatform.org, and ggkp.org. In last week's training, we covered the basics. What is resource efficiency? Why it matters for the climate? And why it makes business sense to become more resource efficient. In case you miss it, the session is available online at ggkp.org/re_business case. And today's session will introduce the resource efficiency roadmap for businesses, including first steps companies can take towards resource efficiency, how to select the right resource efficiency measures for their business, and the role of employees during the process of becoming more resource efficient. The training will be led by Manuel Weber, an industrial engineer and scientific officer at VDI, and Max Müller, formerly a business consultant and current project manager of EU and international affairs, also at VDI. Before we get started, I'd like to encourage all of you to raise questions throughout the webinar through the question box. These questions will be shared in real time with Manuel, Max, and other participants. And we'd appreciate if you could take a few minutes after the webinar to complete our webinar survey, because your feedback will help us shape our future webinars. If you have any technical issues, you can email us at contact@ggkp.org and we will help you troubleshoot. Finally, please note that a full recording of today's webinar, including the presentation, will be available at ggkp.org shortly after the webinar. Join us at the same time next week for the final training session in the Resource Efficiency for Businesses series, where we will look at real-world business experience with resource efficiency and examples of good practice. Without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome our resource efficiency experts, Max and Manuel, to begin the training.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that kind introduction. And thank you also to all the colleagues at the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership for giving us the opportunity today to conduct this webinar on resource efficiency in businesses. Before we start with the actual content of this webinar, which my colleague Manuel Weber will proceed with, I would like to give a brief overview of the organization we come from and what our background is here at the VDI Center for Resource Efficiency in Berlin. The VDI Center for Resource Efficiency was founded as a cooperative project between the VDI, the German Association of Engineers, and the German Federal Ministry for Environment, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety. Our main task is to provide technical information to support companies to implement measures of resource efficiency and to provide that information in a practical way. Since we're closely connected to the German Association of Engineers, this also involves the development of guidelines, the so-called VDI guidelines on resource efficiency. So far, there has been a series of a guideline series on resource efficiency being developed, and there are further guidelines in the making. Here you see an overview of the tools and services we offer to companies, especially to small and medium-sized enterprise as our core target group. Besides qualification courses and seminars and the development of guidelines, which I already mentioned. We, for example, also publish a series of studies and what we call short analysis on hot topics in resource efficiency, which you can find online on our website. There are several tools and publications available also in English. And I would also like to point out that there is a web video platform available and a YouTube channel. And I would like to invite you to have a look at the videos highlighting measures that have been implemented in companies already. Please, the next slide. Before starting, I would also like to thank our colleagues at GIZ for making this webinar possible today. This webinar was developed in the framework for resource efficiency and climate protection of GIZ, which is funded by the International Climate Protection Initiative of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. And its core tasks is to raise awareness about existing potentials and strengthen national and international dialogues, to support international networking and cooperation, to strengthen the capacities of key stakeholders worldwide, and to provide consultancy for identifying and tapping of potentials for enhanced resource efficiency and climate protection. The focus lays on emerging economies within the G20 community. As Stephanie already mentioned, last week there was a webinar, the first webinar of this series today, that was focusing on methodological principles and measures for resource efficiency and SMEs, with a brief discussion about barriers and drivers for resource efficiency. In today's webinar, we will look at how to turn resource efficiency into a reality by following a roadmap that companies can make use of, can apply, and make resource efficiency become a reality. I would also like to warmly invite you to join us in the third webinar next week that will focus on strategies, measures, and real-world experiences that will in specific look at product and process related strategies for improved resource efficiency in companies, and we'll also, in an interactive discussion session, look at the question and the connection between digitization and resource efficiency. And now I would like to almost hand over to my colleague Manuel. But before we will have a look at the key questions of today's webinar. What are the steps toward an implementation of resource efficiency in companies? How companies can analyze their production sites in terms of resource efficiency and assess selected identified measures for improvement. And third, which role do employees play before and during the implementation of resource efficiency in companies? We will look at that last question in specific during the interactive session at the end of this webinar. On the next slide, you see the agenda of the webinar today. We will start with an introduction into the roadmap resource efficiency. Next slide, please. Here, the key questions are how to increase resource efficiency in companies, the basic question that has come up several times already in this introduction, what are steps towards an implementation of resource efficiency, and how to define the scope of investigation. And with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague Manuel, who will proceed.
Thank you, Max, and also a warmly welcome from my side, and thanks for joining again for the second webinar today. As Max mentioned, we start with the introduction into the roadmap, resource efficiency. Next slide, please. So first of all, I would like to give you an overview of the guidelines Max already mentioned in the topic of resource efficiency. The methodological basis for the resource efficiency is given in the guideline VDI 4800 Part 1. for a resource analysis, the following guidelines are relevant. So it's on the one hand, the VDI 4800 Part 2, which is resource efficiency evaluation of the raw material demand. The VDI 4600, where the cumulative energy demand is determined, and the VDI 4800 Part 3, where indicators for evaluation of environmental impacts is focused. The Part 3 is still under development. In addition to the principles for determining the cumulative raw material demand in the VDI 4800 Part 2, also the raw material criticality is defined and how to determine it. In the VDI 4600 guideline, this guideline deals with the calculation of the cumulative energy demand, which is part of a whole resource efficiency analysis. For the application of principles of resource efficiency, the guideline VDI 4801 describes strategies and procedures that in particular small and medium sized enterprises can follow for the implementation of resource efficiency. And our webinar today, which focuses on this roadmap, how SMEs can proceed, is based mainly based on the VDI guideline 4801. Next slide, please. Among other things, the guideline describes this, the step-by-step approach for increasing resource efficiency, additionally, the VDI Center for Resource Efficiency has published a guide which explains the individual steps toward the implementation and refers also to a recommendation of methods and, if available, tools for supporting. This guideline is already available in German on our website, but it will be published as a booklet for a free download in the next week via our website, resourcegermany.com, under the section publication. Next slide, please. Here we see the overview of the whole roadmap we're going to follow in the next hour, I would say. And you see we have like 5 steps. This will include the analysis, the development of improvements, the assessment of these solutions or approaches, the implementation of resource efficiency measures, and finally the monitoring. As I mentioned, step by step, we go through and have a more detailed look into the several steps. Since an overall view of the business activity is often too extensive, so a detailed scope of investigation should be defined beforehand. So for this purpose, you should ask yourself the following questions. Which resources are the most important within my company, and which fields of resource efficiency do I want to prioritize? In order to answer the first question, you should identify the relevant input and output streams for the entire company. But even if you have prioritized one of the fields, the production process or the production environment or the product development, you should still open to improve any of the other areas that are not prioritized for the time being. In the course of the analysis, it may turn out that improving resource efficiency in other areas has a much greater impact or is easier to implement than the first place identified.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for giving us an introduction of what we can expect of today's webinar. On the next slide, please, we see the agenda, and that Manuel will proceed with the conduct of the analysis, so to say, at the first step in the roadmap resource efficiency. Key questions on the next slide, please. Key questions here are how to analyze a factory production related to resource efficiency aspects, what methods and tools can be applied here, and an important question as well is what data is required to run this analysis and to make it successful. Please, Manuel.
Next slide, please. Yeah, and as Max mentioned in the following, we would like to introduce you the step of the analysis. This is an essential step, or is an essential step is the analysis of the current situation in the company, because only if you know where and how many resources are consumed in your company and how your product influences resource consumption, you can take improvement measures. Next, please. So the system boundaries are essential for the analysis. On this slide, you can see different approaches in relation to the life cycle. So the gate-to-gate analysis means that the analysis only focus on the manufacturing phase. If you have a cradle-to-gate analysis, this means that also previous production processes, such as the raw material production, are included in your analysis. And if you take the whole life cycle into consideration, then the cradle-to-grave consideration will analyze the whole life cycle from the raw material production up to the recovery or recycling of the product. For a comprehensive analysis, it's recommended to perform a gate-to-gate analysis and at least a simplified life cycle analysis. Next slide, please. Then let's first consider the gate-to-gate analysis. We can distinguish between a rough gate analysis and a detailed gate analysis. In the first step of a rough analysis, the areas and processes to be considered in production are determined and their material flows are examined. For the detailed analysis, suitable focal points are selected and detailed examination for these areas is carried out. For this purpose, input and output flows are identified and quantified for the respective areas. Next, please. So recommended steps for a rough gate-to-gate analysis would be first the definition of the areas of the investigation and the production process. As I said before, so you have to choose which area you want to start with and what are the first improvements you would like to take. The next step would be identifying of the input and output streams. One very important point would be the data determination, as well as the plausibility analysis. So you would have to check is this data real, and could this be the right one, or do I have to measure something additional? And the last, the evaluation and the selection of the investigation priorities. As I mentioned before, the identified focal points are then further examined and quantified in detail, and this will happen in the detailed gate-to-gate analysis. Next slide, please. On this slide, you will see a selection of supporting methods and tools that can be used for a rough gate-to-gate analysis. Just to point out some examples that would be, for example, an input-output analysis, but also an ABC analysis, or if you also want to take your suppliers and customers into consideration, so you could make a CPOC analysis. As a supporting tool, I would like here to mention the VDI resource checks. These some of these are also available in English, so there you can get a rough idea where to start your analysis. These are only a few ideas what supporting methods can be looked at. So it depends on the knowledge in the company, or also examples that are already used for. If you have a look to the required qualitative, mostly qualitative data or estimated data, that's necessary to have knowledge of the process flows. For example, there might be already process flow sheets in the company that can be taken into this analysis, but also input streams for material, energy, and water. And these data you can ask from your accountant, for example. But as well, output streams, for example, waste and wastewater, are required data that you have to have a look at. Next, please. By analyzing the life cycle, not only the potentials in their own production can take into account, but also those for increasing resource efficiency over the entire life cycle. So the analysis of the products with regard to material composition, the resource consumption, for example, in the use phases, but as well as the recycling processes, can provide starting points for improving resource efficiency in the life cycle. So after also a rough analysis and a selection of these priority products or life cycle phases, they have to be examined in detail. This requires for sure a lot of data and on various resource consumption over the entire life cycle. So this means that detailed analyses are often very time consuming and complex. Next, please. As in the gate-to-gate analysis, sorry. Next, please. The recommended steps are here also quantifying the benefit first, and then a first qualitative analysis. And after this, the quantitative analysis will follow by the evaluation. The focal points from the rough analysis then again can be examined in detail with the framework of a detailed gate-to-gate analysis. Next, please. For a rough life cycle analysis, here you see the recommended method is the MET matrix. M stands for material, E for energy, and T for toxicity. This is a simply method that can be used for a rough life cycle analysis. For this analysis, mostly qualitative or estimated data refer to the product specification, but as well as resource demands in the life cycle phases. As I mentioned, for a rough analysis, you would estimate this data and then can decide, well, we have a specific material that is have quite a high impact on resource efficiency. So, and therefore I would try to improve this part. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see an overview of different supporting methods and tools for a detailed life cycle analysis. As I had, as you've seen before on the overview of the VDI guidelines, there you can use the cumulative energy demand according VDI 4600. But as well as the raw material demand according VDI 4800 Part 2. And as maybe some of you will already know, doing a life cycle assessment regarding the ISO 14040 or 14044. The required quantitative data refer as well to the product specification data. So this includes what materials are used and what other inputs will flow into the product, but as well the resource demands in all life cycle phases. And especially resource demands in the life cycle phases are often difficult to determine. So in most cases, this life cycle data is set from professional databases that can be used from this analysis. Okay.
Thank you very much, Manuel, for giving us this brief overview of different methods and tools to make use of when conducting an analysis of a production site. In the next step, we will be looking at how to develop improvement measures derived or based on that information we gained in the analysis. But before we move on, Manuel, since we have already some incoming questions, Zainab, for example, wants to know, does resource efficiency have an affect the overall competitiveness of a business? Do you have an answer to that?
Maybe when we jump back from last week's webinar, there we have seen that the reduction or the increasing of resource efficiency will lead to a reduction of the costs in the first place. That will help in the first place to increase the competitiveness, but as well, if you have a look on the side of the development, new products or resource efficiency product, that also make the possibility to open your products to a new market, to new customers that are more ecological, with an ecological background.
More ecologically have a higher awareness of that topic. And I think related to that question, Akwasi wants to know, does resource efficiency affect business effectiveness? So maybe there is the assumption that never change a running system, what to tell companies if they are still hesitating to implement measures or to even start thinking about resource efficiency, what to tell them about the impact it has on their effectiveness.
It's true, there's always the fear that with new production processes or also products, there will be an effect to the product quality. I guess it could be a problem, but there are often very straightforward solutions or possibilities that can be directly integrated into processes with slightly adaptations, and therefore I guess it's always a solution that at least the product quality and the process will be still stable. But yeah, it's depending on the particular case, and you have to look into your product processes and also your products and decide which is the best solution to adapt.
Thanks for that brief answer. And maybe we move right on with the next slide and the next part of the presentation, focusing on the second step of the roadmap, development of improvement measures, looking at possible solution approaches, methods and tools that can be applied here, and data, again, that is required when developing improvement measures.
Next slide, please. Based on the preceding analysis, as Max said, the second step is to develop a suitable approach or solution to increasing the resource efficiency in the company. So our next step will the development of improvements. Next slide, please. So some essential points you should keep in mind is the most suitable measure of improvement must not only be technical feasible and economical, because yes, every company has to be economical to survive, but it must also ensure that the required product quality is achieved. So that's what I mentioned before. So first of all, the product quality should be still stable, and technical, feasible, and economical are the main issues that have to keep in mind. Further questions that you should be asked in advance are: is there a willingness to realize the measure? And in some cases, a monetary investment is needed, and when it is needed, is it available? And does your staff have enough time and the expertise to realize this solution or the resource efficiency measure? Next, please. The possible starting points for solution development can be divided into three categories. This is product-related, process-related, and process-independent solutions. Next, please. When we have a look to the product-related solutions first, so these are measures that often have the greatest influence on the resource efficiency, since the product development not only determines the largest share of the cost, but also the majority of resource consumption over the entire life cycle. So just to show some of examples of strategies and measures that can be taken in this part. So if you remember last week's webinar, we had an example of a product service system that was the chemical leasing. This could be an option, but also the production-oriented product design, circulation-oriented product design, as well as lightweight design of your product. Then a better choice of material, for example, but as well beside the product development for the customers, the resource efficiency product usage, so a lower energy consumption, for example, in the use phase, but as well as the product service line extension or the technical lifetime. So these are just showing how different these measures and strategies can be. I will not show for every of these examples. In the next sessions, we will select some of these examples and show how companies in real life have realized such strategies or measures. But this will give you a first overview of different strategies and measures. Not every manufacturing company that is operating within the value chains has an influence on the product design. For these companies, process-related approaches and solutions for resource efficiency play a major role. So especially since they can influence themselves the manufacturing process in their own plant. Next slide, please. Here we have some of the process-related solutions. The optimization of the manufacturing process is quite a huge strategy that can be differ in this million ways. So it's really depending on the specific situations in the company, which manufacturing process you have, and how to optimize it. Recirculation of products and components. This majorly means that you try to keep in cycle your material flows and reuse scrap and recirculate it in your production. Just to point out some more strategies, you can try to minimize your machining volume, especially in the metalworking sector, or to minimize the plant scrapped. And what is also a very important and maybe not too difficult to realize measure could be the minimization of the storage loss. So you keep an eye on your storage and try to optimize it as in the best possible ways. Reduction of energy consumption, especially in the core processes. But for an example, for auxiliary materials and operating supplies, you can try to use these in cascades, or substitute this auxiliary materials operating supplies with more resource efficiency solutions. Next slide, please. Product and process independent solutions include mainly measures that infect the production infrastructure. This means the technical building equipment and measures that referring to organizational structure, such as the procurement process or also logistics. Here we have some general strategies. So this efficient building structure, if you remember last week's webinar, there I've pointed out some of the possibility, for example, the use of rainwater, but as well as efficient lighting or efficient pumps. An efficient energy supply could be that you try to generate your own energy by photovoltaics, for example, and the efficient company organization, which is also quite global wide measure. This includes all the company business activities and try to optimize these and reduce their resource consumption. Efficient logistic, as I mentioned already, and efficient procurement are another strategies and measures that are product and process independent solutions. On the next slide, you find a selection of supporting tools and methods that can help you to find the solution, beside some creative techniques such as brainstorming. There are also more structured procedures in the design process or the explicit consideration of resource efficiency aspects in the product requirements can also be used. These are just shown some of the supporting measures. For more individual information and methods, I would like to recommend you the guide I've mentioned before that will be published on our website.
Thank
Next,
you,
please.
Thank you, Manuel, for giving us a summary of how improvement measures can be developed following the analysis you were summarizing before. And as Manuel already mentioned, I would like to invite all of you to join us next week again, when we will present some real world examples, so to say, of some of these measures that were turned into practice. We already have some incoming questions again, Manuel. I would like to have a look at. For example, Matthias, if I remember correctly, yes, Matthias wants to know what about missing data? What about missing data in such an analysis? Does it have an impact on the outcome of the analysis?
Well, for sure, the analysis, especially the detailed analysis, refer to the right data, but you should at least start with an analysis. So if you're not able to measure or collect the data in the first place, you should at least start your resource efficiency analysis and estimate, or maybe ask some of the employees regarding their experience and their estimation about this data. So for sure, the more data you have, the better. But as I mentioned, it's better to start with missing data or estimated data and begin the whole process for improving the resource efficiency. Hopefully, yes.
Thank you. Sun Cho would like to know how can companies monitor the impact of a resource efficiency measure they implement. If I remember correctly, that's something you will be talking about later today.
Yes, maybe I will answer this later on. So because then we have some examples how to monitor it. Especially this will happen by using performance indicators. But I would rather
We'll keep it in mind.
answer this
Okay.
question later on. Maybe then it's already.
Final question for now. Halim, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. Your name wants to know does resource efficiency always need to be a top-down approach, or can it also be led by employees? Can it be also a bottom-up approach?
Well, maybe this we can discuss also later on. Maybe just an idea. I guess if there's the idea coming from the employees, from my perspective, that's a good sign, and the manager or the director should be aware of this. Hopefully, there won't be too much effort to show them the results of resource efficiency, and he will also support this way. But maybe we can discuss this later on a little bit more.
Involvement of employees as something that we can discuss during the interactive session later in this webinar. Thank you, Manuel. So in the next part, we will focus on the assessment and selection of improvement measures based on this step before the development of improvement measures. And in this part now, we will look at how to assess and select measures and what methods and tools, again, can be applied here in this assessment. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. So here you can, on the overview, see that we already reached to step number 3. That would be the assessment. And for implementing the right or suitable measure, the different solutions and approaches must be some kind of evaluated according this technical feasibility, as I mentioned before, but also the economic viability and the influence on resource efficiency, for sure. Next slide. Furthermore, the following questions should be could be in consideration in this evaluation process. How does this measure affect other life cycle phases? So that's what we had before also in the analysis of this analysis part. As well as how does the measure affect the production process? So this also refers in the product quality and the efficiency. But you should also always keep in mind which stakeholders will have to get involved in the company. So this can be different departments of the company itself, but also suppliers or customers that are be affected by the measure. Next, please. So for the technical and economical evaluation, for example, you can carry out some kind of point evaluation of different solutions. So there are different approaches how to compare them between but as I mentioned in the last slide already, the technical feasibility, the cost effectiveness, the product quality, but as well as the implementation time and the implementation effort should be under consideration. For the evaluation of the resource efficiency, this can be quite a complex point because as we had or we have seen in the analysis already that quite a lot of data regarding resource consumption over the entire life cycle is required. And here again, the indicators that can be used for the assessment. This will be the cumulative energy demand, the cumulative raw material demand, but as well as the greenhouse gas emissions. So these are different indicators that can be used for assessment resource efficiency. However, a complete life cycle analysis is not always mandatory for every measure. So especially when resources are saved without any significant additional effort, a life cycle analysis is not really necessary. So that makes it a little bit simpler. So if you see, okay, if I just can reduce by implementing these specific measure my material or energy consumption, then it's not necessary to do a life cycle analysis in detail. However, in some cases, the improvement of one life cycle phase can mean a decline in another life cycle phase, or the reduction of one resource can result in an increasing demand of another resource. In this case, you should this case should avoid it in any case, but therefore a life cycle analysis can help to avoid this. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see again some methods and tools that can be used for the technical economic evaluation and for the evaluation of the resource efficiency. In particular, I would like to mention the analysis of the life cycle costs and another tool of the VDI Center for Resource Efficiency, that is the cost calculator. With this tool or with this module, you can evaluate different investments on the basis of life cycle costs and there compare it against. Other supporting tools for evaluations of resource efficiency, unfortunately, is only available in Germany, but one of these modules in the cost calculator, there you can have a quick analysis about your cumulative energy and raw material demand and also the greenhouse gas emissions by adding the quantity of your materials and energy used, and there you have a quick overview what's the impact on this.
Thank you, Manuel. So again, we would like to invite you to have a look at our website, resource-germany.de, where there is quite some information and material available in English for free on these topics, and also, as Manuel just mentioned, a cost calculator tool, for example. I would suggest we move on with the next part of this webinar, the next step in the roadmap towards resource efficiency. So after the analysis, the development of improvement measures, and the assessment of these measures, now comes the phase of implementing these measures, turning them into reality in operational practice. How to implement these measures is a key question in this part, and what methods and tools can be applied here. Please continue, Manuel.
Yes, thank you, Max. And now the fourth step of the roadmap. Next slide, please. As Max already mentioned, is the implementation of these measures. Next slide, please. For a successful implementation, it's important that responsibilities are defined and all affected employees will be involved. So that's one of the major issues, so that you involve all the employees that are affected. And for this, it's advisable to form a project team with appropriate expertise and with clearly clearly communicate the relevant responsibilities. So in order to implement measures efficiently, you should not only show the goals, but also the background of the measures to the employees and the affected persons. That's important because often if you will have a look into a company and make it more efficient, there's some kind of fear of the employees that, oh, okay, they want to improve the whole process, and then maybe my job is in danger. And so in first step, it's clearly to communicate what's going to happen and what are the goals of the improvements. Furthermore, you should be open to dialogue and take suggestions from employees in your company seriously. So, because often there are some ideas from the employees how to improve the process or their work themselves. So you should take this seriously and hear them. Where necessary or appropriate, you should also provide training. So because it's often that something is implemented, but nobody of the employees or only a few know how to deal with it. So this training will help to do the right or to optimize their own production and productivity, but as well as to take the resource efficient idea into consideration. Supporting methods are on the one hand the good project management. So yeah, for every effective project, you need a good management, a good planning. But also on the other hand, you can work with some kind of workshops that are in the department itself or interdepartmental level. So
Thank
this
you,
is already the
Manuel.
fourth step.
So that's the fourth step of the roadmap. And before we continue, we have incoming questions, and I think one is referring back to the development and assessment of improvement measures. Matthias wants to know how can we assess the sustainability of measures and make sure that resources will not be wasted in the name of resource efficiency?
That's a good question. I guess sustainability in this case, well, they just come together. I think sustainability and resource efficiency come together in one point, that it's more on the economic way. The social part, which is not addressed in the resource efficiency topic itself, but on the sustainability side, I guess, as I mentioned, to communicate what's happened with this improvement. So the idea should not to improve and increase the profit and then maybe skip some jobs because of okay, we can improve our resource efficiency. Now it should be involving the employees and help them to do the right process, or to maybe have then a resource efficiency and higher qualified process, and it's not to lose any of the employees. So that's, I guess, should be in part of it, to take all the employees on board and show them that with resource efficiency and reducing the resource consumption, it's not necessary to lose any employee.
To make
Hopefully
employees redundant, and
yeah.
in terms of resource efficiency as savings in material and energy related to cost savings, could also mean in economically difficult times, instead of saving costs related to personnel, for example, it could also be the first place implementing resource efficiency measures and saving material and energy instead of personnel costs, right?
Yeah. Hopefully this was the answer of the question.
I think I'm sure if it wasn't, please let us know. We are this
Yeah.
chat room, and all the other participants, please let us know. We are looking forward to your questions. A final question here at this point, and I think it's also a bridge towards the next part of this webinar. Halem wants to know how can business owners and managers inspire employees to go the extra step, to take the extra step, to go the extra mile, to bear additional burdens related to the implementation of resource efficiency.
Yes, as you already mentioned, so we will discuss the role of the employees a little bit later on, but maybe just a quick answer from my side. I guess every manager or every director will say, "Oh, that's interesting. When we can save money on the onset, then it's an argument." But not only the costs, but as well the resource saving, and therefore maybe the corporate image of the company could be an inspiring position that an employee can lay on the table.
Okay, thank you, Manuel. Now we will move on with the next step, the last step of the roadmap towards resource efficiency, the suggested roadmap. And this step is the monitoring of already implemented measures. Guiding questions here are how to monitor in general, and again, what methods and tools can be applied. Please.
Thank you. So next, please. So here, in the overview now, we arrived at the fifth step, and the last step of the roadmap, as Max already mentioned. This will be the control of the implemented measure directly after the implementation. So you have to check: will it have the result that we expected? But also the regular monitoring in the future. So this will help for improving continuously these measures. And improve the resource efficiency further on. As I quickly mentioned before, the main instrument is using performance indicators for the monitoring. Next slide, please. Performance indicators can be created at different levels. There are performance indicators on company level. For example, this can be indicators as they already are in the environmental management system placed, and management indicators, but it can be also indicators on the process level. So this can be process parameters, for example, or specific consumptions. In addition to regular monitoring of these performance indicators, another method can be an internal audit that can be used for monitoring the success of the measures. Next, please. On this slide, you can see only a short overview of possible performance indicators. The first part is relating to the production, and the second part is relating to indicators relating to life cycle phases. So just to give some examples so that you can imagine what are indicators that can be implemented or regularly monitored. So this is on the one hand the energy costs. So, for example, not the overall costs itself, but it's more the energy, specific energy cost per unit, for example, but also the power consumption per volume of supply and exhaust air, specific material costs. So in this case, also costs per unit or cost per meter or square meter, depending on your product or your process. Another example can be paint consumption per painted area, for example, for painting processes, or the quantity of waste per unit of time can be another indicator that can be used. Waste per product can be implemented. So this will just give you a quick overview how different performance indicator can be used. Other performance indicator that related to life cycle phases can be the raw material production. Regarding the raw material production, can the land required per mass of raw material in this case, or in the use phase, here is an example, the power consumption of a refrigerator per unit of time. So,
thank you, Manuel. While we're talking about indicators already, Jerry wants to know why collecting data is important. The question of measuring against a global benchmark to define progress is important. Are there any such benchmarks?
Well, there's always the questions for benchmarks. I just have a little smile on mine because it's quite difficult to well, there are some benchmarks defined, but if you look on a process level, it's quite difficult. So there are on a EU level, there was some tries to define the best available technique and the best available benchmarks on specific sectors, but there are some, but it's hard to define what is the best benchmark how that should be achieved. If you have a look to the different performance indicators relating to products, it's really depending on the process you have, on the product you have. And so it's not easy to give a global benchmark for a specific point. For sure, there are some indicators that are more relating on an economy or on an overview. But if we speak here from a company performance indicators, it's really difficult to define the right benchmark because different products are so different, and processes are also so different. It's hard to define. So,
thank you, Manuel. I suggest we move on with the next slide, please. And if there are any imminent questions regarding this last part of the webinar, covering all the different steps of the roadmap towards resource efficiency, please let us know now. And we will try to react quickly if we can. I remember there was a question before asking about social impacts of measures. Are there any approaches towards considering the effects on social equality, for example, on gender equality related to a certain measure? Is there any thinking happening already related to this? Is there any approach here?
Yeah, well, I think that's quite a difficult question from my side. So as I'm always more related to the technical solutions. Well, I guess more spoken on a general level. So if you start implementing or improving processes and do some change management, so you might take other points into account as well. So as you mentioned, so the gender equality, for example. So from my perspective, I don't know if there's a direct connection or a direct link to it, but I guess when you start a change process and also try to improve the resource consumption, the energy consumption or water consumption, so then you should address also in this improvement process or change process other important things like the gender equality, and maybe also involve these into your change process.
To keep that in mind and to include these aspects as well. But yeah, does resource efficiency look different in different sectors? Sun Cho wants to know.
I would say yes and no. So for sure, if you look to the core processes of different industries, they can be totally different. So it's different at one hand. So if you have this product or process related solutions or approaches, but when it comes to the process and the product independent solutions, it can be the same measure. So if you, for example, have an industry building and you focus on the using of rainwater, for example, or the supply of energy, then it's the same when you're in a metal processing company, but as well as you're in a wood processing company. So I guess it's depending. So they're quite different and yeah, quite specific measures, but also they are quite similar or even equal solutions.
Thank you. Zainab wants to know, how can resource efficient companies find other resource efficient companies for improving the resource efficiency in their supply chains, for example?
Well, I guess as for every improvement, or well, they have to speak together, I guess. I would recommend if you yourself and your company say, okay, I want to try to improve a specific process or specific business activities, then I will have in my analysis also the suppliers into consideration, and then I can speak with my supplier and ask them, do you have also, for example, a resource efficient alternative to the product you at the moment are supplying? So it maybe yeah, could be made of recycled content, for example, or have lower impacts on the environment. Often it's good to ask your supplier, and they might have solutions, or if there's not a standard solution, they might develop a solutions with the company together.
Thank you. And if I may add, from a perspective of a business support organization, whether you're talking to front-running companies that are already really advanced, that are really aware of the topic, or to business that start thinking about resource efficiency just right now, or are not considering it until today, providing a platform and facilitating a conversation and facilitating a communication process between different companies is in my perspective really a good way to support the topic. And I know that on the European level, there are certain platforms that want to encourage these companies and even the business support organizations to exchange good practice examples, to start communicating with each other, to share experiences. And this is why such a webinar today is so valuable, to have this sort of exchange also on a global level. And since I assume many drivers and barriers you've talked about last week during the webinar are in many cases not so different, and we're facing the similar challenges here. So having an exchange of experiences and facilitating these communication processes is really valuable in my opinion. But let's not stop here, I guess. Let's move on with the actual interactive session of today's webinar, focusing on the role of employees for implementing resource efficiency in companies. The next slide, please. Here you see the agenda once again. It's the final point, the interactive session. And on the next slide, you just can get a basic idea of what Manuel and I would like to ask you. Do you have any experiences with how to motivate employees, or do you have any ideas how motivators could be employees could be motivated to support those processes? What excuses do you expect? Please share your experiences with us, and we will quickly go through all the incoming questions. Thank you for that.
Maybe on the next slide, just to engage a little bit the discussion, or we have here compiled a few excuses that companies use when implementing resource efficiency. So maybe this will help, or maybe you could say, oh, well, we have also this experience, or oh, well, that's in our case not the problem. So for example, you hear, we always work like this. So nobody told me what to do. It's none of my business. I'm too busy. So yeah. And what often in Germany, it's we don't forget we have to earn money, so there's no time for implementing resource efficiency or such a change.
I'm 100% sure this is applicable to almost all companies globally. So what you may get from these comments we made on this slide, you see that before actually implementing or thinking about resource efficiency, there is quite some hesitation in companies. I see that there are questions, for example, coming in about how to prioritize certain measures, or how to prioritize one measure against or towards another one, how to choose, prioritize one production line you want to make changes related to or over the other. Is there something you would like to say to that, while you're still giving us some comments you have on how to motivate employees and excuses you might expect before we continue with that part? I know.
Well, maybe I just pointed it out in the roadmap so far as it was possible in the short time, but you have to assess these different solutions and different possibilities for your improvement process. So I guess it's not always easy to prioritize it in the first place, but well, often there's not a huge possibility for investment. So the first thing you would start at are the very the measures with a little investment or without any investments. So this would be maybe a starting point in the first place. But if you identify a process that is quite has a high impact on your costs and your the resource consumption. So I guess this should be a first step to look at. So if you see, okay, if I improve a process that will save me like 20% of the whole material costs, then you probably would focus on this process in the first place. I guess you have to decide in a specific situation what are the most important or the first measures you want to take. But I guess so it's the cost and the resource consumption itself, but also these ones with low investments.
Thank you, Manuel. So I hoped that was a question from Vajirani. Manuel was answering your question somehow. I would suggest we move on, Manuel, with your overview of approaches to employee involvement in the processes. On the next slide.
Okay, next slide, please. So just for the end, I would like to wrap up a little bit the whole ideas or the excuses and also give you some hints how employees can be involved into the whole change or improvement process. So here some points that should be some of our recommendations. So these employees should be heard as early as possible and integrated. So when you start this improvement process, as I mentioned before, to take them on board with the team and hear what they have as ideas for improvement, it's quite important. As I also mentioned beforehand, the knowledge of the employees on the material and the production is in the most cases such specific that you can use it for your improvement process. And as we had as a method for an implementing method was a workshop. So you might bring your employees together and speak about their knowledge and their experience in the production and the specific processes they work with. The next point will also address this topic. So the experience and the value is value, and you have to show them that is valued and that you will take this under consideration in the whole improvement process. And yeah, employees don't just want to be asked, they want to get involved. So it's not that you say, okay, you have to change this process because then it's going to be more resource efficiency. No, just try to involve them, try to speak with them and try to get the best out of the process. So then they feel, okay, well, I'm on board and I'm involved in the whole process. Next slide, please. So and finally, you will see some aspects for which processes in the company the employee involvement is also essential. So for obtaining all this process information that is referred to the data collection. So you have to involve the employees, otherwise they will tell you not the right truth. So involve them and say, okay, we want to improve our process. What are your data? What is your reject rate? So you have to find out the right information about the process. Then for the cooperation in the continuous improvement process, for sure, you have to involve your employees. and the communications and the communication about the potential of resource efficiency. There, you always have to involve employees and get them on board and try to communicate what's going to happen and what's the success and how it will affect the work of the whole company. Also, the joint discussion of the feasibility of the implementation, it's important, because if only the management just decided, okay, we just want to improve this process and we have a new technology and this have to work, there might be concerns about the implementation, that it's not that easy, or there are some aspects that you have to take into account by changing the process, or yeah. And last but not least, the training and training measures is quite important to upskill your employees. Yeah, as I mentioned, if you decide to improve resource efficiency with a new technology, with a new process, with a more resource efficiency process, it's important that training is provided and everybody knows how to deal with the new process.
Thank you, Manuel. In the meantime, we had quite some good comments and also questions. One example from Marina, she was mentioning that in Mexico, and I think this is applicable to a lot of other regions as well, specifically in SMEs, time is a big barrier to even start with thinking about resource efficiency. Only a few employees might have time, or they are busy in operation and management. So that might be a main cause, perhaps also an excuse to start with implementing resource efficiency. What is your opinion on this?
Yeah, that's true, and it's also always a barrier that we hear from the SMEs here in Germany, especially the SMEs. Well, it's difficult, I guess, but if you take the time and try to improve processes, and maybe also the organizational structure, and doing on improvements on the organizational level, it may affect afterwards that you will produce faster and more efficient as before. So I know it's kind of time consuming, and everybody has to sit together, make this workshop, providing ideas, but at the end of the day, it might be a possibility to make the production line even faster. And so, yeah.
You mentioned organizational changes, improvements in the organizational structure. Matthias has a comment, I think, that could be seen as related to that. He suggests that it can be good to integrate resource efficiency as part of other established management systems, so as to minimize redundancy of tasks and loss of motivation.
Yeah, definitely. That's also a point we try to recommend to our SMEs, that most of them, or some of them, already have at least a quality management system or even an environmental management system, and there the topic of resource efficiency can easily be adapted with. So if you try to integrate, for example, performance indicators regarding resource efficiency into your already existing management system, it's not even that time consuming, because you have to analyze your data anyhow and do your internal audits anyhow, but maybe the effect or effort will be greater.
Thank you. Vajirani says that's apparently a case in a company in New Zealand he experienced. A director mentioned that it is simply too complicated.
Well, yeah. What can you say? It's depending on the measure. For sure, it's in some cases it's not easy, but as I mentioned, it's not only have to not every time has to be the big change or the big effect to the process. Some minor or not even minor, but measures that affect, for example, the building structure. Might be not too complicated. There are so many different solutions that are available on the market without any or with only little adaptations. So
within the structures and infrastructure around a production site, production line, there could be minor improvements actually that sometimes they're called low-hanging fruits, right? That are not
these,
that
but
hard
also like investments. So if you decide to invest generating your own energy with photovoltaics or solar thermic energy, there are solutions already on the market. For sure, in the first place, you have to invest somehow, but afterwards you will get your money back. So
maybe one way to convince management is, as Matthias suggests, go down with concrete benefit, cost potential, list structures, and talk to management on the cost benefit it might have, and using this as a way to convince.
I also would suggest, as we had the last webinar, the main drivers are economic reasons. So you have to show the economic benefit, and then you might have a chance to find a solution for your company or your partner.
Thank you for all of your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Do you would like to address anything else, Manuel, at this point? Otherwise, I would suggest please, or would like to invite you, please join us next week again in the next webinar. Manuel, maybe you will briefly, you can briefly say something about next week's webinar. And
yeah, we introduced it in the beginning of the webinar already. So now we have seen the roadmap, how especially SMEs or companies can be go forward step by step, do the analysis, do the development of the improvements, do the assessment, do the monitoring. In the next session, we will more focus on specific strategies and measures, what we had in the overview before, so the process, product related, but also product and process independent solutions. And in the next session, we will see in detail how companies have realized such strategies and measures. And yeah, hopefully this will make the theoretical approach a little bit more clear, and what are the possibilities for resource efficiency and how different they can be. And as we also mentioned before, in the next discussion, we'll show one important topic, at least here in Europe, is the digitalization and the Industry 4.0 technologies. And we want to discuss if they have an impact on resource efficiency, or can they help to improve resource efficiency.
And I'm very sure this megatrend is happening worldwide, and I'm looking forward to your experiences with that, and looking forward to discussion next week. So thank you very much for your time today. I feel very encouraged now to see the green growth community, the resource efficiency community here in this chat box on my monitor and actively participating. This is really motivating and encouraging, and I hope we can continue this next week. So thank you very much for joining.
Thanks a lot from my side as well, and see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.